Einen schönen guten Morgen.
Good morning and welcome to our third and unfortunately last day of the 18th Salzburg Europe Summit, the Conference of European Cities and Regions. Welcome again on behalf of the Institute of Regions of Europe and its board, especially on behalf of our chairman, Professor Dr. Franz Schausberger, and on behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Ehner and Dr. Falschlehner. I'm happy to also welcome you on behalf of the Presidium. I would especially like to mention our colleague Klaus Reithan, who will be present today as well. Now, our slogan this year is Visions for Europe, Expectations and Reality. This is a very topical slogan. The corona pandemic has tested our resilience in Europe, and now we're seeing a war that Russia is leading in Ukraine, and it is testing our security architecture. And as far as our security in our industry is concerned, and really each single citizen is concerned, this poses new challenges. Now, we've had with 6 panels and more than 50 participants, and some remote participants. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine was connected remotely yesterday. Helga, she's responsible for Europe. And all of these participants talked about specific questions. This year is the European Year of Youth, and the summit started with a youth discussion. We are Europe was the slogan, exclamation mark. Because young people in Europe have more opportunities than any generations before them, educational opportunities. They can easily travel at low cost, but they're also facing challenges, high expectations, the climate crisis, and of course, as far as the peace is concerned, which we always took for granted in Europe. And the dialogue led to very optimistic conclusions. I'm very happy that so many young people are interested in our conference and that so many students from Salzburg are present today again at our proceedings. Students from Handelsakademie 1, Handelsakademie 2, the Höhere Bundesanstalt for Agriculture are present today. I myself used to teach there, and also students from the Wirtschaftsrealgymnasium are present today, and also students from the Academic Gymnasium of Salzburg. I myself went to that very school. Let me say a word of thanks to the very committed teachers that have made it possible for their students to attend today. Now, we are looking at a topic that is very important for Europe today, the enlargement. This is a topic we discussed last year already. Last year, we talked about the enlargement towards the Western Balkans. But now the conditions have changed. New opportunities have presented themselves, and the speed of the entire process has changed. And the panel that looked at enlargement this year was facilitated by Manuela Scheidretter, the correspondent of the ORF in Brussels, and she led a very interesting panel. And all the participants have launched a call to all of those present. They stressed how important it is for the EU to focus on enlargement, because otherwise Russia or China could become more active in the region. And yesterday we had a very interesting opening session which focused on the EU and its crises. We had the EU Commissioner for Budget and Administration present. We had the Federal Minister for EU and Constitution, Carolina Edstadler, she was present, and the Vice President of the European Parliament, Nicola Beer. And then two other panels looked at natural resources and energy for Europe, and our Federal Minister for the Economy, Martin Kocher, gave the keynote speech. And then we had a panel on digitalization where the Austrian State Secretary for Digitalization held the keynote speech. And we had many participants from the industry taking part in that panel. And today we're going to look at two other topics that will be important for the development of Europe, the European society, and also European economy. Investing in the Balkan regions is the topic of our first panel. And again, we're looking at the enlargement of the European Union. During this panel, around 17 million people live in the Western Balkan countries. They're not yet members of the European Union, but it's a very beautiful region. Politically and economically, this region is very important, and for 15 years this region has been waiting to accede to the European Union. I'm looking forward to the keynote speech of Helga Berger. She's a member of the European Court of Auditors who is responsible for investment, cohesion, growth and integration. And then we'll have our last panel today. And we'll be looking at the topic of agriculture. We'll be looking at food, and this is something that is important to every consumer. And we'll be discussing whether regional is the new organic. We've all lived through the corona crisis, and now we are faced with war. And this is why regional projects have become more important. Regional tourism has become more important as well, but also regional food. And I'm looking forward to the keynote speech of Robert Tocznik, the Federal Minister for Agriculture of Austria. Let me say a word of thanks to the moderators, Ms. Marjana Milikovic. She's a correspondent of the Wiener Zeitung, the oldest newspaper worldwide. It was founded in 1703, and I hope that this newspaper will continue to exist in the same form. Ms. Milikovic is the correspondent for Southeast Europe, and this is why she's an expert on the region. And I would like to say thank you to Michael Kretz. He's the editor of the regional media Bezirksblätter Salzburg. Each year this paper awards a prize for the regions, and this goes to show how important this topic is for the newspaper. We've heard many positive and optimistic statements so far, but nothing should be taken for granted. Europe and every individual citizen shouldn't just wait for the crises to pass. We really have to react and continue to develop our visions. And we have to make sure that we use our visions to strengthen Europe. Once again, on behalf of the Institute of the Regions of Europe, welcome to this third day of our summit.
Vielen herzlichen Dank für die
Thank you very much for these introductory remarks. Please, Ms. Helga Berger, your keynote speech.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for starting the last day of the 18th Salzburg Europe Summit with listening to me, with listening to the results of an audit of the European Court of Auditors, which is, as we are auditors, always a bit critical, but always with the clear intention to improve things. My name is Helga Berger, and I'm since 2020 the Austrian member at the European Court of Auditor in Luxembourg. The ECHA, as we call it, is one of the 7 EU institutions. Oh, danke. One of the 7 EU institutions. The external auditor, the watchdog of the EU. And before starting, I would like to thank for the invitation and the possibility to share with you the results of this audit, where we have assessed the support of EU to rule of law in Western Balkan countries. As all of you are aware, we have enshrined the principle of rule of law in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union as one of the common principle for all member states. But it is as well a guiding principle for EU foreign policy, and it is also essential and necessary condition for EU membership. The rule of law is, above all, in particular, also a key factor for economic growth, for human and social development, and at the same time, poorly functioning of rule of law is a core of a lot of problems. Western Balkan countries have a significant economic potential, but rule of law weaknesses, poorly functioning of institutions, and state overreach hampers this economic development. I will hopefully press the right. Okay. Yes. As you know, the EU is the biggest donor in this region, and together with some member states, the EU invested substantial political and financial capital. To support rule of law projects, the EU has made available 700 million euros in the period 2014-2020. And as you can see on the slide, the financial support targets a broad spectrum of rule of law areas. However, the problems in the region persist. There are clear elements of state capture, including organized crime and corruption, in different levels of administration and politics, and there is a strong entanglement of public and private interests. Against this backdrop, the European Court of Auditors started in 2020 a project to assess whether this EU support to Western Balkan countries for rule of law project has been effective, whether the support was well designed, and whether the planned results has been achieved. We focused this audit on the 2018 EU strategy for Western Balkan and on the changes arising from the new methodology for enlargement negotiations. What are our main conclusions? For sure, EU actions have contributed to reforms in technical and operational areas, such as improving efficiency in judiciary and development of relevant legislation. But the support has only had little impact on the fundamental rule of law reforms in the regions. What are the key reasons, as we have found out? This is insufficient political will to drive the necessary reforms. This is lack of ownership for reforms and lack of commitments to use project output to further advance the reform agenda. These are weak administrative capacities and lack of sustainable financial support. In particular, we mentioned in this audit that EU support for civil society action was insufficient in meeting the needs of the sector. The consequence? Public support for the reforms necessary is declining. Let me explain some details. As already mentioned, the EU supported the rule of law pillar with a dedicated budget of 700 billion. And you can see this on the next slide. Our assessment showed generally a consistency between political priorities and financial support, which is in general really positive, and we highlighted this in the report. And undoubtedly, there are positive developments, but limited progress in the rule of law. What are the fundamental problems? The independence of judiciary, media freedom and freedom of expression, political interference and corruption remain. The key role of civil society is only partly addressed. The Commission has increased the financial support for civil society organizations, for example, through the European Endowment for Democracy. But evidence showed that EU support in this area is still insufficient in meeting the needs and is too often just focused on short-term projects. We highlighted in the report that the Commission has identified the right risks in Western Balkan countries, but it has not taken sufficient mitigating actions. What are the topics we have pointed out? In any case, there's a problem with the effectiveness. In particular, measures to address weak administrative capacities are often ineffective. Enforcement of compliance with commitments made was not always ensured. The second pillar, the already mentioned political will, where project components focus on technical assistance, enhancing capacity, institutional efficiency, political support was strong, and these activities generally proceed according to plan. Where the target is on amending the legislative framework in order to strengthen independence or accountability, the political commitment was often much weaker. We have in the report the example of Serbia, where important constitutional reforms have stalled. The third issue we mention in the report is the use of conditionality. Strong conditionality delivers results without doubt, but the possibilities were not systematically applied to mitigate risks. The rules for applying conditionality are not clear enough. Rule of law reforms are not directly linked to restricted funding in investment-intensive sectors like agriculture or public infrastructure projects. Although conditionality can be effective, as national corrections can be triggered, the mechanism is not used enough. We have, for example, in the report, the example of Bosnia-Herzegowina, where finally in 2021, future financial assistance for the High Judicial and Prosecutorial Council was ultimately linked to reform results, which is a positive step. Number 4 in the sustainability is the sustainability. Only a few projects have really a long-term impact. The assessment shows that too few projects were taken up by the national authorities, giving them some guarantee for long-lasting financial impact. Most of the reform were dependent on the continuation of EU support. We mentioned in the report, for example, the confiscation fund in Kosovo, where capacity problems and reluctance hindered the continuity of what was achieved during the project implementation. Let me come to the last area, corruption. We point out in the report that the situation in sectors that are vulnerable to corruption remains largely problematic throughout the region. We quote in the report, beside others, the situation in Albania. While numbers of procedures without prior publication has fallen significantly in recent years as a result of the reform agenda, public procurement seems to improve. But sources interviewed said that corruption in public procurement remains pervasive, with clear indication of state capture. What has happened? Corruption has simply shifted from newly regulated areas to non-regulated ones. As you can see on this slide, despite many years, 20 years of EU support to reform in Western Balkan countries, fundamental problems remain. EU has for sure encouraged positive steps, such as the development of sector strategies, actions plans, institutional capacity building, and legislation that allows greater independence, accountability, and access to justice. But progress was limited and sustainability difficult to achieve, especially in the area of rule of law. At the same time, and coming to an end, I would like to highlight some positive aspects. The recent developments, especially the new methodology with clustering the negotiations of chapter in place since 2020, is seen by the European Court of Auditors as a step in the right direction. But at the time of our audit, it was too recent for any visible results. As we always finish our reports with positive side, with our recommendation, I would like to conclude as well with the recommendation we have given in this report. Commission should strengthen the mechanism for promoting rule of law in the enlargement process, intensify the support for civil society engaged in rule of law, reinforce the use of conditionality in IPA 3, and strengthen reporting and monitoring. We are convinced that with the last developments, with this new methodology, there is room for really improving the situation and to achieve the intended goals and to contribute to more economic growth, human and social development through rule of law improvements in Western Balkan countries. Thank you for listening, and I'm now excited to listen to the discussion. Thank you.
Dankeschön, Frau Berger. Danke für den Impulsvertrag.
Thank you very much, Ms. Berger. Thank you very much for your keynote speech. Welcome to our panel. We will be talking about investments in the Western Balkans. Thank you very much to the participants in this panel. I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion. Minister, I would like to turn to you first. We heard much remains to do, and it's up to you as a minister to make the necessary political changes. How easy is it to invest in Kosovo?
Okay, thank you. I will speak in English. In fact, recently, with the creation of a government from Prime Minister Albin Kurti, a lot of changes have been done in Kosovo recently. First of all, we are changing and we are trying to make our legal framework aligned with the European and international best practices and European standards. So based on this, we have, let's say, from World Justice Report for 2021 is ranking Kosovo at first place in terms of rule of law. Also, we are changing other laws and regulations in terms to facilitate the potential investment in Kosovo. So if someone tried to invest in Kosovo before a few years, and now there are a lot of changes, and absolutely I would invite any potential investor from Austria or other EU countries to come and see what are the changes, do study visits, and see what the potential we are offering for potential investors.
In welchen Bereichen können sich die Investoren?
In which areas can investors invest?
Would you invite investors to?
In fact, there are a lot of areas. One of them that I would mention, not because that I'm coming from computing or information and communication technology, but we have a young population, which there are about 70% less than 35 years old, and a lot of them, they are interested in information and communication technology. Some of them, they know different programming languages, different IT skills, and they are looking for different possibilities. I have met many of young talent people in different cities of the country, and even right now they are working as in outsourced projects for Austria, Germany, and other countries. So one of the definite sector is information and communication technology, and also there are a lot of support like infrastructure support. Let's say we have the Innovation and Training Park in Prizren, which was former German Army K4 camp, and now it comprises with 56 buildings. They are ready to use, and day to day they are being filled by different investors from Germany, from Austria, Switzerland, and elsewhere. So there are a lot of changes, as mentioned recently, and also other areas, which is one of them is food processing, wood processing, and so all of these potential investors are really welcomed in Kosovo.
Junge Leute sind das Stichwort.
Young people, that's the buzzword here. Young people are innovative, they're digital natives. And this brings me on to the topic of startups. Mr. Schausberger, you're a member of Elevator Ventures, and you look at investments and startups. What's the potential you see in the Western Balkans? Well, Raiffeisenbank International is present on many different markets, and for some years we've been investing in startups in the fintech area, but also in other areas. 50 million euros are earmarked for this. We have invested in 13 companies. 3 companies have been sold at a profit again so far. So it does work. You can make money as an investor in Central and South Europe. Why do we do this? Well, first off, we want to make sure we have access to the business models, to the technology, and to the young talents. And we do believe that these markets harbor an enormous potential. We can actually see this. What do we need to create a startup ecosystem? This is maybe something we'll come back to later, but many factors are already present, and we can already build on a solid basis. Well, you said 50 million. That's quite a lot of money, but it's not quite 1 billion yet. And that's a unicorn. Do we have any unicorns on the Balkans?
Wobei ich sagen muss,
Yes, indeed, but I have to say that 50 million euros can soon lead to a unicorn. That can happen very quickly, and we are investing in a phase where companies are making a turnover about 1 million euros, so far from being a unicorn. However, we're in a phase in which a company can either remain a solid, reliable company, but never become a big multinational company, or it can go the other way. So these investments are really decisive, and there's a phase prior to that with a couple 100,000 euros. Often that's done publicly, fortunately. In Eastern Europe as well, the European Investment Fund is active there, and they do it very cleverly, from my point of view, because they invest as anchor investors in local funds, which then bring in private capital and locally invest in the startups. That is the work at the basis, and venture capital funds from other countries can build on that later on and invest in those startups. There are unicorns, and InfoBip in Croatia comes to mind. Perhaps some of you know InfoBip. It's already on the way to becoming a unicorn, or actually almost already is one, and that is very exciting because we have the crossroads between companies coming from different countries, SMS chat functions and so forth. Remarketing is another interesting one. I think they bought Porsche here. In your country, there's Giraffe, Google, YouTube, Amazon, all in one. Also a great company. So it is possible. We have these examples, and that's very telling. Thank you very much indeed. So then let's move from startups to founding a traditional company, if I can put it that way, in the field of manufacturing. Mr. Dedić, you are the CEO of this HEEZ Aluminium company, limited company, and you are investing almost 20 million euros at the moment. And how did that come about? What are you going to invest in, actually? Well, thank you very much for giving me the floor, Ms. Milkovic. Good morning, one and all. It's wonderful to see you here, and I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to be part of this event this morning, which is very interesting, and I'm glad to be involved in your dialogue. I'd like to say the following. Our company, HEEZ Aluminium, is a company active in the manufacturing sector, as you already said, and we decided to do this investment in order to manufacture aluminum in the future and continue also to process aluminum. We'll be doing powder coating plants, for example, and introducing other procedures as well. So this investment in aluminum profiles is a very promising project. It's also a very energy intensive process because that's the kind of manufacturing we do. And therefore, there are many potentials that need to be tapped into. And there is a good basis for this in Bosnia, for this kind of manufacturing, where we have a very advantageous opportunity to manufacture. And that's kind of a gap filler by comparison to Chinese products, where we have anti-dumping measures which were introduced by the European Commission with respect to these Chinese aluminum profiles. And I think that we can win the market with quality. We've taken measures in order to be able to do so successfully. We have carried out expensive investments in the form of extremely innovative new technology, especially with respect to heating the aluminum bars. And here we decided not to go for fossil fuels when heating our bars, and rather we're using renewable energy. And that allows us to buy our energy from green energy suppliers, which allows us to practice sustainability and also to prepare the market in Europe for this kind of development. Well, those are very important keywords. Thank you. Many European companies are now thinking about moving their production to China, and it's very interesting that you instead went to Bosnia and Herzegovina. At the same time, we have an energy crisis in Europe at the moment, which has hit the country in question quite hard as well. So perhaps you could explain to me how in the renewable area energy can be produced without having to tap into traditional gas sources, which may run dry very soon. Well, what you said is exactly right. The water power potential in Bosnia is enormous. About 50% of all the power produced in Bosnia at the moment is produced based on sustainable energy sources, but only 60% of the potential of this water power is being used at the moment. So statistically speaking, the power used at the moment can be covered by water power. And that is, of course, always a very good basis for the metal processing industry and the metal industry in general. Because, of course, this is very energy-intensive manufacturing that we're talking about. As I said earlier, some figures. For 1 kilogram of aluminum, you need 12 kilowatt hours of power. And with that, you can actually supply power for a large city. So it's a lot of electricity. But if you use renewable energies, it's possible to pay 2/3 less for your power, and at the same time you have a good partner and you become a gap filler substituting China. I do have one more question for you. Why Brćko? If I may, let me tell you something about my past. I'm about 50 kilometers from here. I was born 50 kilometers from here in a beautiful alpine village, and I had the privilege of growing up in Austria, going to school here, starting out in my profession here. And therefore, for me, it's a personal task that I've taken on to convey these experiences and this mindset which I learned here to Bosnia to the extent possible. And therefore, I'd like, and in so doing, I would like to contribute to inspiring and motivating people in Bosnia to go down the same career path, because there are many people there who have an enormous potential. And I think we saw this at the time during the refugee crisis, where people went all the way to Seattle in the United States, for example, and they showed their potential in their new homes. And Brćko, to answer your question, 30 years later, I made this decision to link up to these companies and to put this project into practice. And in Brćko, I need to name the investor here. That's Mr. Asmir Vucic, who built up an enormous company in the United States as well, and who decided to invest in Bosnia, which he's been doing for 10 to 15 years now. And it's been very profitable for him, and profitable companies have come out of this. Brćko is important because there's a flat decision-making hierarchy there. It's almost an autonomous region, and decisions are made quickly there and easily. And after we set up our first contacts in Brćko, we immediately gained the trust and support that we needed in order to put this project into practice. And from Brćko, we'll now move on to Serbia and Vojvodina, also an investor-friendly area. And Serbia offers investors tax credits for every job that they create. And how sustainable is this development, is my question to Mr. Simurdić, who runs an office which brings together investors and Vojvodina by networking between them.
First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Schausberger, for having us at this year's conference. And we are not a fund who is trying to combine different sources of investments that are coming to Vojvodina, because we are mainly dealing with the funds that are coming from the EU. And I will continue where Madam Berger started or finished her introduction. When I came to fund 2 years ago, because the main mission of the fund is to deal with the EU agenda on a middle and local base, we asked ourselves what we can do, what we are trying to reach in a mandate in the next 4 years. And the first thing that we have done is analysis showing the capacity of Vojvodina when it comes to the absorption of the funds that are coming through different programs and funds from the EU. And that analysis shown to us that it's the obvious gap between the municipalities when it comes to their capacity to that absorption. On the other side, Vojvodina is a clear example of how one region, who is the best example of Europe in small, can be prepared for the EU accession process, who can be very useful part of it, and on the other side, who can promote that agenda on a middle base. Why is that important? If we take a look on examples of new member states, we will have a clear result that the implementation of 2/3 of acquis communautaire lies in a middle and local base. And you will not find at the moment any region across the Western Balkan, and any municipality that recognizes the potential and their role in that process. On the other side, why is that obvious gap? Because of three reasons. The first is institutional capacities of the local authorities, how to push the project cycle management. The second is clear list of priorities, and the third, the prepared documentation. We are trying to be concrete as much as we can, and now it's a good momentum. We are starting a new budget period of the EU, 21-27. There is economic investment plan for the Western Balkan. Economic investment plan, 9 billion plus 3.3 that came to as a support for the pandemic. And our analysis is showing that they can bring another 20 billion of euros in next 7 to 10 years, either private, either public investments. We are coming with that in almost third of the entire GDP of the Western Balkan. But those funds need clear priorities and need people who can push all the things. These days in Serbia, my colleagues, before I entered to the public administration, I work for the Serbian civil society. These days in Serbia, there is a couple of proposals how to push the entire process. And one of those is showing that there is a concrete approach when it comes to the phase accession, with the purpose to have more funds in this period, so to decrease the gap between the Western Balkan and the European Union. On the other side, I'm asking them, we at Serbia, we have approximately per year 250, 260 million euros. And I will just give one clear example how important it is to be part of a club. Our neighbor in Croatia, with population 3.8, 3.9 million people, they will have in the next 7 years almost 25 billion euros. And we as Serbia will have 2.5, less than 3 billion. So that's a difference being a member of a club and standing in front of a door. But if we try to reach Chapter 22 and cohesion policy, if we want more money from the EU, the question is, are we capable to push it in an appropriate way? That is why our fund is insisting in the next period on two things. We are following the priorities that are part of the new budget period of the EU on one side. We try to put it in 5 separate chapters, all those projects that can be implemented successfully. Green agenda, economy with a special focus on agriculture and food production and IT, where we see a great potential in the upcoming period, public health, science education, and culture. But on the other side, for that successful implementation, we need capacities. So strengthening the institutional capacities of middle and local level is a crucial precondition. And on the other side, those grants that are coming from the EU are not enough. Vojvodina managed to absorb less than 60 million euros in a period 2014-2020 through 4 CBC programs with Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, Romania and Croatia, plus 2 transnational programs. But those 60 million grants are not enough. So if we really want to be a successful story, it means that we have to combine different sources of funding. Not only grants coming from the EU, plus credit lines and lines of technical assistance, technical support, and the end, and that is very useful why we have Madam Dedić with us, to try to really push the concrete public-private partnership. In these global circumstances, in this global mass that is happening around us, that PPP is going to be the most powerful tool probably for the next decade. So to conclude, everything lies in the people. And if we want to be a successful, as a common region, a successful European story, we have to understand what is the final goal and what is a tool to that final goal. It's not only becoming a member of the EU, it's about really understanding that European integration process is bringing an opportunity to transform the society in those areas on which depends the quality of daily life, in public health, in science, in education, in many others. For that, we need to have a clear list of priorities, to combine different sources of funding, and at the end to strengthen the capacities, so to have a better analysis in a couple of years when it comes to the institutional capacities of all, and to push the entire process as much as we can on a local ground. That's what we are doing as a fund. And I'm not speaking typically about investments, but I do want to speak about investments in Vojvodina that are coming from the EU funds, because those are the most valuable investments. 3 billion euros came from IPA 1 and IPA 2 to Serbia. Let's be clear about not what is done, but what has to be done. For that, I think that we have to follow those 3 preconditions, and at the end, we can have a better puzzle of the results for the entire region.
Private-Public Partnership war das Stichwort. Wie weit ist denn Serbien, Frau Dedić, in dieser...
Ms. Dedić, PPP was mentioned. You are the CEO of PPP Invest Limited. How do you see this issue? How many PPP projects do you have in Serbia? How many private-public partnership projects do you have in Serbia? Is this concept being implemented widely in Serbia?
Talking about this specific model of investment, public-private partnership, I would like to say that the situation of and the investment climate in Serbia is, despite of all of these geopolitical political tensions in the whole world, is quite stable. In the first 6 months of this year, the investments in Serbia were 1.6 billion euros. And what is more important, that there was no postponement on the very important projects that is announced before. So this COVID crisis and the social economic crisis created this huge gap between between what you need from the budget and what is available to the local municipalities and the cities. So this is a place that where we need these more and more private initiatives and specific private capital. This specific model of investment, PPP, is very attractive and very often used in Serbia. When we're talking about Serbia, the situation of PPP is that we adopted the law in 2011, and since then the Commission for the PPP and concessions adopted more than 200 PPP projects. Over 50% of those projects are already implemented. So we as a company prepared more than 40 PPP projects. Those are, we say small projects, but when I say small projects, I'm not referring to their economic value, but just to their financial value. Their economic value is much more higher than their financial value, especially for the citizens and on the local and of course on the national level. Those projects are mostly in the energy efficiency area, such as the public lighting projects, heating system with the renewable sources and the natural gases, of course road maintenance, public transport projects, and many, many others.
Und jetzt komme ich zu Ihnen.
And now I'm turning to you, Mr. Josef Schöchl. You're already investing in the Western Balkans with NetQM, an electronics company. You are active in Bosnia and Herzegovina. How did you get there? What brought you there? Well, first of all, it was a coincidence, and secondly, there were also strategic thoughts about distance and transport routes, because we go very close to the Croatian border on very well-organized highways. So that's about 5 hours drive on a highway. And so we were thinking about the distances to Sarajevo, Belgrade, and Zagreb, about 2 hours each, and the size of the city. And that's why we went there. So it wasn't just that you found qualified people to work for you there. or a good investment climate? Well, I have to say that we've been there for 18 years, and at the time there was no investment support for us. We started out very small with just 6 members of our staff. Now there are 400 people working for us there. And of course, the impulse there at the beginning was that wages were very low, and the potential of having very young staff was extremely high. We still have an average age of our staff at 27 years of age. And most of our staff are very qualified. They've all finished high school, and many of them have also, in recent years, completed a technical qualification as well. So could you take your staff to Austria as well? Well, I'm afraid they've been going to Austria lately very often. It used to be very easy to get enough staff there. Now it's starting to change because people are starting to leave. They're well educated and they know that they can work in Austria but it's easier for us to find staff down there still than it is here. But of course, young people want to go and work in the European Union, and it's becoming easier for them than it was in the past. Minister, how will Kosovo manage to keep young people there in Kosovo, in their homeland? Because, of course, you need a young workforce, don't you?
Tackling the problem of brain drain and young people leaving the country.
In fact, that is a problem that many of Western Balkan countries are facing. But as far as we have a large diaspora, and many of those that migrated earlier, they are returning back to the country of the origin and contributing. So I could say we are seeing a kind of migration life cycle, which young might want to migrate to, let's say, EU or North America countries, and then after a while they're creating a capital or knowledge and experience, they are coming back to the country of origin. One of the example, it's me myself. So I came back from Canada to join the new government and to help my country of origin with getting part of EU countries, or being member of EU. So it's something that we are seeing, let's say, youngs. Even last night I met 16 or more young students that came for master or PhD degree in Salzburg, coming from Kosovo, but at the end of the day, they are contributing either directly or indirectly. And also when it comes to investment climate, we are seeing that in many cases, for example, last couple of months, I met several Austrian potential investors, and many of them came with someone from our citizens or population that are living in Austria or diaspora. So it's something that at the beginning we might see that it's a kind of brain drain, but at the end of the day it's coming to be also brain gain.
The brain drain is probably, the source of the brain drain probably is political frustration, because Kosovo is still has some issues with Serbia, or vice versa. So how is this political situation hindering Kosovo in implementing reforms or?
So in general, as mentioned, we are doing a lot of legal framework reforms. So we have changed a lot of laws. We have transposed several EU directives, or many directives, and we have amended our national laws to be aligned with the EU directives. When it comes to one of the things that we are working hard is to change the image of the country itself. For example, yesterday I met someone said that I'm imagining Kosovo as a country with issues or troubles. But in fact, as the country is changing, and in a couple of months, let's say we had many activities and many conferences or events that are happening in the country. For example, before a few weeks there was Balkan Digital Summit. So all 6 Western Balkan countries were there, and one of the speaker and guests was His Excellency Luka Mendel from Austria. So also before a few days there was another event organized by President of Kosovo, and that was about women, security and stability. So in fact there were more than 500 international guests and speakers that took place in that event. Also each couple of weeks, either in information and communication technology or other activities are happening, events there. Of course, we need to improve many of things, and especially when it comes to implementation. It doesn't mean it's enough just to have a good law, but we need also we need to have technical capacities and human resources that are capable in implementing those directives and those frameworks.
As a part of the civil society, or former part of civil society, and now in a fund, can you tell me the role? Can you tell me something about the role of the civil society in Serbia? And for example, how do you influence the political standpoint on how the politics will turn themselves in for EU, or let me put it in German,
how can Serbia, or how would Serbia like to position itself with respect to the European Union? Because at the moment you have quite a divided position with respect to the Ukraine war and the traditional partnership with Russia.
In one sentence only, I can say that we are fully committed to a final goal that is called becoming a member of the EU. And then I can go back from the perspective, from the capacity that I do represent today, and with the mandate that I have, and it's a European Affairs Fund in a province, so I don't want to go on a high politics. And on the other side, discussing the EU agenda, it's not about 2 things or 2 chapters, or 3 key issues that are maybe most present from time to time. If we go back, the expectation for the last 20 years were maybe on a higher level than these days, because we are now sitting in 2022 and forgetting that the first summit that opened a door for the entire region happened in Croatia, in Zagreb, in November 2000. But for understanding what we have to do, or understanding what we want to achieve, it's about offering a new narrative when it comes to the EU accession process. And we can do it only if we go not from the national to the local, but from the local to the national. And that's a crucial thing for all of us that are willing to become a member of a club. Why is that? Those local administrations are closest to the people. They understand their needs, they understand their obstacles, and they are willing to push things forward in a way to really have the European conditions in those areas in which you mentioned at the beginning, what are the most important ones. And if that we understood all, then we will stop the brain drain. Or not a stop, but from brain drain, we will go to the brain gain. How to keep people to stay in their respective society is a crucial one, but not only for the Western Balkans, but for the entire world. It's not true that only we here in the region are facing that challenge. Demography is more powerful and more influenced than the daily politics across the global scene. Not because of the same reasons are people leaving, but that's the fact. But I'm coming back to the topic of this session, and that is how we can hire the investments. Investments through the EU funds, investments through the EU programs for which we have a mandate, and what we are pushing as a fund is a crucial one. But for that, I'm coming back, everything lies in a human capacity. At the moment, while we are sitting here, Poland is having less than 20,000 people who are dealing with the project cycle management. That's not a cost, that's an investment. So we have to strengthen the capacities. We have to be clear about that those people who are dealing with the project cycle management on the local ground, how to strengthen their capacities, but in the same way, how to keep them to stay in that local municipality, because that's a challenge for us. When I'm saying that we as a fund are doing or dealing with that, we are following 3 pillars: public finance, public procurement, and project cycle management. But then you're dealing with another issue. If I have a small municipality in Vojvodina, for example, Opovo or Novi Kneževac, without clear capacities for implementing and developing the concrete projects, if I push them in a way to strengthen the capacities in those areas, then I have another problem and another issue. People will recognize that for the same service, they can have a higher salary, not in those municipalities, but they will try to move to Novi Sad, or at the end from Novi Sad to Belgrade. Then we have to have a clear, concrete institutional line, if we work with them, how to follow them in a way to stay there. And then to make a concrete, or to merge all those priorities in different elements, in different areas, in a way to really improve the living conditions. For that, the grants are not enough, as I've said at the beginning. For that, we need to combine different sources, especially in the upcoming period when the obvious financial crisis will be present.
Frau Berger, ich komme jetzt einmal zu Ihnen zurück.
Back to you. This is certainly a very important statement, that credibility would get lost if no results are delivered. This was, I believe, one of the key statements of this report. So how can reforms in terms of state of law be fostered? And in a nutshell, what are the most important findings of the recommendations of the Court of Auditors? Yes, thanks for coming back to this. I think we as Court of Auditors have as audit objectives always the economical use of public money. And this is exactly what we have done also in this exam. What was successful and what are the reasons why projects are not successful? And I think in the audit it has come out quite clearly that a missing political will, a missing commitment to projects sometimes is a problem, particularly when more sensitive topics are to be implemented. When it comes to using technical and organizational measures, the projects were successful, the money used took effect, but we did also see that if it was about constitutional reforms or accountability or independence of institutions, the money spent was not so effective. We also saw that capacity building is a problem. Mr. Simurdić also said it. A broad basis has to be created in order then also to have the will to carry and foster and promote projects. Of course, we also touched upon the corruption issue I mentioned the example of procurement legislation, which is always a problem as to the state of law, where the procurement is done in a correct manner. And the final point, in order to repeat this, is of course sustainability of investments. Many projects just have a startup funding from the EU, but what happens then when the European funding expires? And there we did see that this taking over of funding from national money is not always granted, and that basically successful projects would expire and not be continued when there is no more European money. These are, in a nutshell, the most important points, and this also has fueled or fed our recommendations as to use this continuity, also the national anchoring and implementation of projects. And the feedback which we did receive, I believe, has been a very good one. And I think that it shows also very clearly the preparedness to turn the right screws in order to improve. And I think also to create a basis with the IPA 3 funds, which will come between 21 and 27, so that the money can actually be spent more effectively and more sustainably. What about PPP? Would that be a model in order to actually continue launched projects later on with private money?
The main goal of the PPP projects are satisfying the public interest. This category is defined by the law on PPP and concession, but above this category, the satisfying of the public interest, there is some more things that this model makes more attractive to the private partner. This is the safety of the investment of the private partner. You know, when you are a private partner and you want to invest some money in any project, first you want your money to be safe. So these projects is safe for the private partners. That means that fee collection on the collection of receivables from public partners is regulated by a special law on commercial transactions, and there is have no delays recorded so far. A legal framework in Serbia is transparent and encouraging. And what is more attractive is that more and more financial institutions, such as IFC, EBRD, EIB, and the other commercial banks are investing their funds. So this is additionally contributes to the attractiveness and safety of this model. What I want to say finally, that this model is a perfect tool for investment in Western Balkan countries, especially in Serbia, because Serbia is a leader in the region in implementing the PPP. And there is a lot of space to be invest, especially in Serbia, in the communal areas. And I would like to use this opportunity to call the European companies and the financial institutions to invest more money in this PPP model and providing services, and to be competitive in providing services, especially competitive in prices, because especially when you compare to Chinese companies and that are present on our market for the last 10 years.
Ja, ich glaube, in Österreich haben wir genug Unternehmen, die...
I believe in Austria we have many companies venturing into this, and it's not always an adventure, always is backed by the EU, so it's legally regulated very well. So may I ask you again, when you went to Bosnia and Herzegovina 18 years ago, which stumbling blocks did you meet, or were there none?
Keine Stolpersteine wäre jetzt.
Speaking of no stumbling blocks would be maybe understatement. To create a company there is not complicated at all. It's like here. Of course, one is supported in this new mood in Serbia, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, I believe. If you go there as an Austrian company, you are supported by all sides. The stumbling blocks then and still today are that one is outside of the EU and the transport of commodities and goods across European borders is a bit difficult. Normally our truck would go from Winter to Salzburg within 8 hours, but then there is an additional 12 hours lost at the borders. So this is the border from Bosnia to Croatia, and also between Croatia and Slovenia. There the trucks or lorries have to wait for many hours and have to queue there. So the stumbling block there is just the handling at the borders, and I'm looking forward to what the minister would say about how that could be settled in the Kosovo. Let's ask him, what about customs procedures in Kosovo? How long do trucks have to wait?
How long is the transport waiting at the border? How?
Yeah,
in this, not only the legal framework, but also in these practical circumstances, how?
Yeah, when it comes to logistics, it depends from cases, and usually if the transportation is going via Albania, so we have Albania has Durrës port, so there we are using a lot that port, and now it's going to be as a main hub for many of transportations. As well, we are using different highways we have with Northern Macedonia too, and Serbia, and we have some connections with Montenegro. Sometimes there are delays, but normally time to time, of course, we are trying to eliminate this or to simplify.
So how long are the waiting hours in front of the border?
As said, if it's coming from Albania, maybe 0 or a few minutes, or even from Northern Macedonia.
Ja, wir haben auch
Well, we have some microphones also here in the audience, and before we go on up here, please ask your comments or ask your questions or make your comments in Croatian or English or German. Or are there any entrepreneurs here, any business people having experience in the Western Balkans region? Or maybe also in Croatia or Slovenia? So that we can maybe compare to those regions. Maybe there it's easier now after they having become EU members. Okay, no reaction so far, so let's go on up here. What then are the next few steps for your company? How many people will you recruit? In total, 60 people will be recruited for full capacity. But we have also made sure that our future investments into the piece of land will also be made. We have an 87,000 square meter piece of land, but only 1/4 of it is being used so far, or will be used, and the rest, that's for our investment into the future. And this for a reason which I have broached already. This is primary production of aluminium, which is highly energy intensive, and by means of those fundamentals in Bosnia, we can also use the geographical situation in Bosnia at Brćko, where there is also a port, a harbor, which offers us very good conditions, meaning a direct connection to the waterways Rhine, Main, Danube, from the Black Sea to the North Sea. So we have this connection now also. which offers us very many advantages for the production of aluminium. Speaking about aluminium, where do you get your raw materials from? Directly from Bosnia, in Mostar, but there is something also in Slovenia, in Turkey, and the inland waterways also allow us to purchase from farther away. So this would be an additional advantage. You do not only have short distance into the EU, but also raw materials available in the country. Yes, and I can also add to what I said before, and that is the social responsibility of companies. In Brćko, from our office, we can look into the European Union, and it is our mission to use our CSR in order to build a bridge which actually exists. We want to see ourselves as bridge builders. And we want to contribute to what is clearly defined in our mission statement, building that bridge and also linking the European community and Bosnia. So Bosnia and Herzegovina have a highly complicated political system. Is this a stumbling block, or does that not matter to you as a company? Does this have an impact upon investment and preparedness for investment? If, politically speaking, the situation is a bit complicated? This is the reason why we have opted for Brćko. It's almost an autonomous territory, and there we have a bit flatter hierarchies in decisions, and so processes are dealt with much more speedily, and we have been very well supported from the very beginning. And this is the very reason why we have opted for Brćko. Because granting processes, for instance, are much faster. And for you, is the political situation decisive for your investment, or maybe not? Is the political system a stumbling block, and how? No, definitely not. It's, as our colleague has said here, actually everything comes from the municipalities. We do not care about the big politics, so to speak. Rather, our customers are pessimistic sometimes as to politics in Bosnia. We as Austrians are not a role model either. That's true. And the startups are interesting as well, of course. In which areas do you see the highest potential? Maybe you can also subdivide this into individual countries. Yes, of course. What do we need in order to create, so to speak, successful startups? You need talent, you need innovative people, people knowing how a business model is scaled up. You need a market where you can grow. You need legal stability, of course, which has often been discussed here. And one needs money. Money which more or less is willing to take the risk. And in all these points, the Western Balkans basically have a very good situation and conditions, because talent, there is much of it, very much of it, particularly in the MINT or STEM disciplines. The technical studies are very good, and for instance, in the area of natural science, there are excellent people. It needn't be economics always. And then there are those MINT talent. And what it also takes, and this is maybe something which we should work upon concretely, this is know-how as to how startups are then scaled up and positioned internationally. How do I sell to international partners, for instance? And here there are the well-mentioned examples, Infobip and Tusherv and some others, and around them. Like in the Silicon Valley, there is the so-called PayPal mafia, and I'm not expecting a mafia anywhere, but there is PayPal, you know PayPal, and the founders then after that also founded so many other companies. LinkedIn, for instance, was generated from that, or Tesla even, and many more, which actually have learned how you create a startup. This has to be promoted. Well, startups in the Western Balkans, what influence do they have? How important are they for the local economy? Could it be a PayPal model, or is there the risk that then they would still leave the countries or the region? In order to leave such emigration, one has to fulfill all these requirements. You need a market. A market is something where there might be a potential weak point, but it can also be a strength, because when you start in a small country, from day one you are obliged to internationalize. And so from day one you can learn how you scale up and roll out such a program for a startup which wants to grow. This is so important. And of course there has to be the political framework, and products have to be transported across the borders, which sometimes is difficult, by the way. Legal stability, of course, maybe an addendum oft mentioned. For us it's very important to also have access to international money as startup investors, and so the legal framework also has to be comparable internationally. That is corporate law, employees' participation, and so this is a topic in Austria and also in the Western Balkans. A US investor has to know what a limited partnership means in Bosnia or in Kosovo, and what is its legal value. And then in order to prevent emigration and the brain drain, and that's point number one, why people leave, that's money. Maybe you get an investment from public funds for the first few 100,000 euro, but then when you require millions for internationalization, that money quite often is lacking, and investors rather come from London, from the US, maybe from Berlin, or maybe from Vienna. And here also RBI sees their role in order to also internationalize and accompany that process, to support it in that phase of the first growth, so to speak, out of one country and into the whole region. And if you see the CEE as a whole region, it's a very strong home base. And if you are successful there, for American, British, Western European investors, this is a very strong signal of internationalization. A question from the audience. As quite often when the son speaks, then the father can come in. Just one reaction here. For some years, there has to be the former commissioner for enlargement, Hahn, and he created that idea of a small common market for the 6 Western Balkans states. I went with him to Sarajevo, where we spoke about that, and all heads of governments of the 6 Western Balkans regions were there. So a small common market in order to prepare for the big common or internal market in the European Union. And that indeed was discussed for a few years, and I just wanted to say, Mr. Ikovic, that maybe one should also ask what the ladies and gentlemen sitting here believe. Would that be an idea to have this as a precursor to the large internal market, to have such a small common market in the Western Balkans? Well, that's a good idea. One further request from the audience, and then we hand back to the panel. Maybe it's not taking up Stefan Schweighofer, Salzburg University. We have been speaking about brain drain versus brain gain. A few weeks ago I spoke to Eddie Rama, and he said the most important thing in the sector of education to him would be that processes of recognition in terms of EU should work better or more easily. And so the question to the audience is, these nostrification processes and recognition, is that for you rather an advantage for investments in the Balkans region, or is it rather a disadvantage if it worked better? Maybe you have a concrete reaction. Thank you. Maybe you, the recognition, nostrification, as we say, recognition of diplomas, of studies, of educational programs.
So about recognizing diplomas and qualifications, in fact, that's a bit of a question. When it's come to maybe to sectors that are highly deficit in numbers in EU countries. For example, in information and communication technology, any young who has finished, let's say, computer science or computer engineering, it's not taking a long time to nostrify his diploma or degree to EU countries. So let's say even in Austria, we have numerous of graduated in Kosovo, and they are working for different Austrian companies. So, but the other side, some sectors, or let's say health, like medical and other professionals, sometimes there are a lot of challenges to recognize their knowledge and to further continue their career in EU countries.
Wahrscheinlich ist
Maybe it's also about some other countries within the EU where recognition should also be a bit faster. And then I'd like to pass on the question. What would be the idea of such a precursor to the EU, such a small common market of the six, as addressed by Mr. Schausberger? Senior, are there any ideas?
Cooperation is not only a precondition, but is a useful tool. And I've been part of the Berlin process from the very beginning, since 2014. And the entire process is bringing an added value. Why? We have to be clear about what are the elements of the entire region. We all here have, in this region, less citizens than one Romania. So the cooperation lies in one region, one market, a step toward market, to the common market of the European Union. Maybe the expectation from the process was on a higher level at the beginning than while the time goes, and we needed at that time more tangible results of the process. It was very good to have the Regional Youth Cooperation Office as a result of the process. It was very good to have different institutions. Another mandate and action plan that was adopted on summit in Trieste back in 2017, 21-24, for the common regional market, lies in the same elements like the market of the European Union, a free movement of all elements. So at the end, I'm happy that from Novi Sad started a new initiative, the Open Balkan, as another useful tool how that cooperation can be pushed. So we have a couple of separate paths, but that are bringing to the same goal. With that, it's not only about economy, it's about that we are changing the image of the entire region. The image that is offering a new perspective, that we are not involving only problems to the EU, but that we are capable to be part of a solution. That is why those initiatives are very important, and there is no doubt that in that lies the future, but not forgetting what is the final goal, and the final goal is to transform the regional borders into European ones. On the other side, just 3 sentences regarding what Madam Berger was saying. Yesterday I met my dear friend Bojan Maričić, and we've been part together of a Berlin process for many years as a Macedonian and Serbian civil society. The obstacles that I'm mentioning from the perspective of province of Vojvodina when it comes to the absorption of the funds that are mainly coming from the EU are common for the entire region. And now when they are entering into a new phase of the accession talks, he said to me, we have the same challenge, and that challenge lies on a local ground. Why Vojvodina is a successful story when it comes to the absorption of the EU elements? The first thing that is crucial, or that is the biggest obstacle for the local municipalities, lies in a co-financing and a pre-financing. And that was ensured by the provincial government of Vojvodina. The second thing lies in the institutional capacities, in a human capacity. Having our fund, it means that we have a clear signal or a clear line how we can solve it in the next period. And third, and most valuable, we have to bring the local municipalities across the region closer to each other, to share the experience, to share the lessons learned, to share the know-how, to share the challenges that are common. Doesn't matter though we speak about the water waste management, energy efficiency, some things that lies in a public health. Those are the same challenges for every and each municipality. And then to think about, I've been to Dubrovnik on a core days last week organized by NALED, and speak with the representatives of DG Regio. They are willing to somehow support the local municipalities on the Western Balkans. The municipalities that are capable to push some innovations on a local ground. But for that, they want a common approach. And for that, that is why I'm saying, let's bring them together. They will change the fears, they will change the atmosphere, they will change the narrative, and they will change the approach. That the transformation, that a key instrument of the entire process is lying on a local ground, and they are recognizing it, and they are willing to push it in an appropriate way. So, doesn't matter, do you have next year some local municipality from Skopje or from Vojvodina, they will tell you the same. The first thing how we can change it is really to address that they are the key actors of the implementation of the European agenda. If we manage to do that, then we will have a clear market for everything, for the investments, for the PPP, for the startups, doesn't matter. But we are making a clear platform. In that clear platform, we are doing reforms in a public administration that is a crucial problem for the entire region.
Dafür wird es wahrscheinlich.
And I think we need to inform people, money, and we have the European Court of Auditors that monitors to make sure whether the right things have been done. And whether this has actually reached the municipalities. A question to you, Ms. Dedić. Now, what is the role of the PPPs as far as renewable energies are concerned? That is the big topic for the future.
Yes, this is a huge subject, very important subject in this crisis. But for example, we as a company right now we are preparing a project with the renewable PPP projects with the renewable energies in the city of Bor and the city of Zaječar. This is in the process of developing this project, and we'll see what will happen at the end. I think this could be very useful. Those projects are not that cheap, but could be very useful for the citizens and for the environment and also for the public budget.
Dankeschön.
Thank you very much.
Wir sind fast am Ende.
We've almost reached the end of our discussion round. Now I'm going to ask all the participants. Could you maybe just state very briefly what do we need for a good, successful business environment in the Western Balkans, from your personal view, as far as your personal needs are concerned? If I can maybe start with you. What do you think we need in order to be able to successfully invest in your case? Mr. Schausberger already said it. Talents are a buzzword. We do have talents in Bosnia. We need the necessary know-how in order to develop new technologies. And we have this know-how in Bosnia, but we need to work together with the EU member states. And if we work together, we can take those steps and we can make progress. As far as Bosnia is concerned, specifically, I can say the following. Bosnia really has the right environment for these investments, but you have to really make sure you can distance yourself from certain stereotypes. And if we manage to do that, then things will look bright for the future. What do you think are the recommendations that you would make? Well, I think trust in institutions always plays an important role. How do you create trust? By ensuring transparency. And I think monitoring by institutions such as the Court of Auditors, in the Western Balkan states can make an important contribution. You need to ensure transparency, and you need to show the people there is someone who makes sure that the money is invested in the right way. I think this is important for the economy. And we have to talk about the fact that these institutions exist and these reports have to be made public. And you also have to make sure you can exert pressure in order to change things. Well, many people in the Western Balkans do have an entrepreneurial mindset. They have to be able to found a company. They need money for this. You need risk capital. We do have venture capital companies, and we do have success stories from the newer EU member states where things work quite well. In Romania, Croatia and Bulgaria, we do have those investors there, and I think the entire Western Balkans need more funds. Funds that are willing to invest in young people in the early phases, in innovative business models. If you have professional investors that can help you to avoid making the mistakes that many startups make. If you have those, then you'll be able to more easily attract the capital at a later stage. So you need money, okay. What do you think? What do you think is needed in order to successfully be able to invest in Serbia?
As I already said, it is necessary for the private companies to feel safety when invest their money. When you have a good legal framework and investment climate is very positive, such as in Serbia, and you have some safety in the fee collection, in financial institutions that are supporting you. This is the only way that the investments in the Western Balkan, especially in Serbia, could be very, very, very attractive.
Thank you. So, in one sentence, what will make investing in Western Balkans, in Kosovo, more attractive?
It's, of course, as mentioned, we have done a lot of changes, and also with new government, we're trying to eliminate corruption. So based on the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, so they ranked Kosovo for 17 places after the new government for last year. So one of the things that we are trying to make sure, and as mentioned earlier, to change a bit country image. So any potential investor feeling safe or trying to mitigate their investment risks, and with that also we are offering now institutional support. We have an agency that is helping different international investors during the investment life cycle. So even pre-investment phase, if any investor is interested to do any study visit without any obligation to invest in Kosovo, they could contact the agency, and agency would be happy to show different economical zones. One of them already I mentioned, the Innovation and Training Park, which is also it's a joint force between government of Kosovo and government of Germany. So it's Germany is investing there actively and trying to bring different businesses from Germany and from different.
This was more than one sentence.
Sorry, it was difficult. Thank you for understanding.
Aus Ihrer Sicht.
Turning to you, what do we need in order to successfully invest in the Western Balkans? One sentence or two.
Institutional support, human capacity, clear list of priorities, not losing the energy in quantity but in quality, education that is communicating better with the market needs, and finally, trust. Trust that we are able, capable, and willing to do that.
Thank you. Und aus Ihrer Sicht?
Ich versuche es in einem.
Now, what do you think? I'll try to limit myself to one sentence. I think we need a little bit of courage, but we also need a lot of respect to the people. The people are very hospitable in the Western Balkans, and they're very well educated. I really like this region. And the people know this, and I think you really have to show the people the necessary respect. That will make you successful in the Western Balkans. Let me summarize. Fight stereotypes, money, safety, security, fight against corruption, making sure we channel energy in the right direction, trust and respect. Those are the right ingredients that we need in order to successfully invest in the Western Balkans. Thank you very much to all the participants in our panel. Thank you very much to the audience as well. Thank you and have a nice day.